So we have two of the most awesome crime fighters in our space. Thankfully, we were able to get the day picked, pick their time slot, and lock it. And we didn't have to change it because I think you two have the busiest schedules of any two humans on the planet. We have Frank McKenna and we have Marianne Miller. The topic is the triple threat, the terrifying convergence of evolving tech, bad actors, and questionably ready financial ecosystem. So I'm going to read the quick summary. Please welcome two highly respected experts in our field, Frank McKenna, co-founder Point Predictive and creator of FrankonFraud. Hopefully everyone subscribes. Marianne Miller, VP at Prove, who has been featured on the BBC News, NPR, and USA Today. In this session, we're going to talk about what happens when new technology and bad actors meet a financial ecosystem that may not be ready for them. As a special treat, our speakers will tell us about the most threatening trends they're seeing right now out in the wild. I'm going to leave it to you guys. Frank, Marianne, please take it away. Thanks for joining.
Hey, everybody. It's great to be here this afternoon. For some of you this morning, my name's Frank McKenna. I have a blog called FrankonFraud. I've actually been in fraud, kind of embarrassing to say this, but for 30 years. I started my fraud management career before the internet was even a thing. So I have seen fraud morph and develop over the last 30 years. I've seen banking, e-commerce, everything change. And I'm really delighted to be here today with I'd say my best friend, Marianne Miller. We fought fraud across the world, in London, in Japan, in South America. We basically traveled the world working for various companies and working as consultants. And so we're happy to talk to you today about what I like to call the triple threat. And the triple threat is really what we call the terrifying convergence of three things: bad actors, evolving technologies, and emerging threats. So we're talking about what I think is, if you're a fraud fighter or a crime fighter, we're actually in probably the most difficult time in history because of the convergence of these three things that are happening right now. So really topical. Marianne, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we can dive right in.
Thanks, Frank. It's great to be here. And, there's nothing more bonding than traveling the world and fighting fraud. And as Frank said, we've been doing this together or adjacent to each other for many years. And it's been exciting. We've solved lots of problems when coming from card fraud and online banking fraud. Frank's been working in mortgage and auto. So it's been incredible with the types of fraud and the examples of fraud that we've encountered. But today, when we were getting ready for this presentation, we started talking about, well, what are the things we want to focus on this triple threat? And we started looking at rapidly evolving tech. And Frank, I think that would be a great place to get started and start talking about what that means.
Go ahead and advance 2 slides there, if you like. And I want to talk about, if we can go to the next slide. There you go, top 5. So we've got 5 types of technology that kind of have me terrified. About 6 months ago, I'd say actually about a year ago, we started to see the evolution of what we call generative AI. And generative AI, most of you know as being ChatGPT, right? It was the first time in history that people have had a chance to interact with AI, and it kind of blew people's minds. And it blew my mind, and that's for sure. And one of the things that I've seen evolve over the last year, and something that I just discovered about a week ago, was a platform called FlowGPT. And in my opinion, FlowGPT is basically the next Telegram. And if you're familiar with Telegram, that's a place where a lot of fraudsters congregate to share methods. FlowGPT is to AI what Telegram was to fraud. On FlowGPT, there's derivatives of ChatGPT that are created for nefarious purposes. There's Fraud GPT, there's Fraud Coder, there's a GPT called Anarchy. There's about 7 to 10 different AIs that are exclusively set up to help consumers or anybody use AI to write malware, to learn how to create synthetic identities, to be able to write perfect phishing emails. FlowGPT is the first technology that I think is an evolving tech that's really going to spell bad news for scams and fraud. And if we could go to the next bullet point, I want to talk about, if you click enter, 11 Labs. Here's a technology that is really blowing my mind. with 11 labs, I was able to upload about 60 seconds of my voice as a sample recording. And within 1 minute, they had perfectly cloned my voice. And I took that recording and I made a recording of my actual voice. I posted it on LinkedIn and I said, tell me which of these voices is the real me and which is the fake cloned me. 90% of people that I know that interact with me on a daily basis chose my cloned voice as my real voice. That tells me that most scammers and fraudsters are going to be able to perfectly clone people's voices. There's a third technology, if we go to the next bullet point, that I want to talk about, called expression camera. Expression camera is an unbelievable technology. It's actually pretty low tech, but if you upload a picture to this particular expression camera, it will basically pull up and actually clone my voice. So if you're looking at my picture right now, what you're actually seeing is a picture where I'm actually doing the talking. It can change my expressions. And this type of technology can be used in romance scams because I've just uploaded a picture. I'm now presenting to you as a different person. Maybe it looks a little bit glitchy, but this can work perfectly in romance scams. This is a technology that I think that is really going to up the ante. If you follow romance scams, usually the scammer can never interact or do video chats because they can't really pretend to be the person that they want because this technology never existed before. That's called expression camera. So you can quickly flip that on and actually make it work. So I'll go back to my normal picture here. This is the real me. And let's go to the next bullet point so I can kind of talk to you about something called Deep Face Live. Now, expression camera, that was a talking photo, right? That was a still photo that I was interacting with, that I was able to talk to you. And it was a little glitchy, but there's a technology called Deep Face Live, which is actually software that you download, and it can perfectly clone any person so that they can become an avatar. So they can basically present near perfect real-time imagery. So if they want to do a Zoom call, a WhatsApp call, a FaceTime call, they can do it, and they can commit even more egregious scams. So that's the fourth evolving technology that I think is really important. And the final one, if we click to the next bullet point, is something that I like that is called OTP bot. What is an OTP bot? An OTP bot is something that you can download off of Telegram or use directly in Telegram to basically call consumers as their bank. So you can impersonate their bank, saying things like, you could send a text message that said, we've seen unusual activity for a Delta Airlines charge for $500. Did you make that transaction? Naturally, the customer will say no. They'll click on no on the text message, and then it'll engage in an activity to try to steal that person's one-time passcode. So it'll be interactive text that will be a one-time passcode. These are the 5 types of technology that I think are really changing the game, and we're just at the start of seeing it. So Marianne, these are the things that I've seen. I don't know if you have any comment or interaction on any of these things that you'd like to comment on.
Well, I just remember the night you taught me what an OTP bot was. You sent me the OTP bot, and I really thought it was my bank calling me. And here it was Frank. And I put in, he said, go ahead, just put in any code. And the codes that I put in, he actually showed me the screen and showed the codes right there where the bad actor can see your OTP that you've been socially engineered out. So these are very dangerous. They've been around for a while. I've seen a lot of financial institutions take really big fraud losses overnight with these. So it's definitely a threat. I think these are, I would say, Frank, if a year ago, if we were talking about what were the evolving threats that we were going to see in fraud, they were nowhere near this level of threat. I would say this is definitely a change in the industry, definitely a wake-up call. And technology is moving so quickly that what we know is the bad actors move really quickly. So let's look at what the bad actors and the kind of, how they're growing more evil because of the fact that, we've got all of this, this particular technology that they can work with. We can move on to the next slide.
Yeah, so Marianne, I agree with you. I think if you look at there isn't a day that goes by that I don't see a news report about impersonation scams where somebody's impersonating the fraud department of your bank. That just started about 6 months ago, and that was 100% driven by those OTP bots, which were released into the wild in June of 2021. So in about 18 months, that became the predominant scam. Because of technology, it became the predominant scam that we see. I know my sister was a victim of that. She lost $50,000. Millions of other people have known people to that. So yeah, I think it's we're in for a long haul with some of this stuff. And let's talk about bad actors, Marianne. I think that the bad actors are more bad than they've ever been. What is your maybe you can give some examples of things if you want to go to the next slide. Marianne, tell me a little bit about things you're seeing.
Yeah, it's, we could go ahead and build this whole slide out because I think it's good to talk about all of these points in here, but we talk about millions of new fraudsters, and if we look at during COVID, and I went to Washington D.C. just a few weeks ago during some of my travels, and I saw a presentation by FinCEN. And those of you who are not familiar with FinCEN, they're a regulator. They regulate financial institutions, and banks and financial institutions, maybe some of you on this call, file something called a suspicious activity report when certain conditions definitely apply. So what FinCEN did is they took a look at the 3.8 million SARs filed in 2021, which was definitely more year over year. And when they dug down in it, they did some SAR narrative deep dives, and they found out that 42% of all of the SARs that were filed in 2021 were related to fraud, just plain fraud, identity theft, synthetic, account takeover. And as we know, the SARs are have to reach a certain threshold, I think $5,000. So it's not all fraud, and all of the amounts related to those 1.6 million SARs was 212 billion. So we're having, we have millions of new fraudsters and billions of loss. So again, Frank, we talk about, the losses in the past, we didn't talk about fraud in the billions. We were talking about frauds in the hundreds and thousands and millions. Now we're in a new age.
We're absolutely, we're absolutely in a new age. I think, Marianne, go back to 1997. What was the annual fraud losses? I remember being 2.1 billion worldwide for credit cards. Right. That included e-commerce, that included everything. And so now we're flipping around numbers. I think COVID fraud, 242 billion in a period of a year. So the scale of fraud is just absolutely incredible, the way that it's going, and it's just going to get worse.
Yeah, I mean, if we just saw, recently in, a regional bank that check fraud actually substantially affected their revenues. This was just in the public domain. It was just a press release about it. So we're looking at, in the past, it used to be credit risk. Now we have actual fraud that's affecting bank profits, where they have to report it to the street, where it could affect the actual bank's stability. So that's a big deal. Then scam states, and we're looking at all this, and we were talking about OTP bots and social engineering. We have whole governments in China and in Thailand and Myanmar and India, whole cities that are just dedicated to sometimes holding people, against their will to commit scams. And, back to your, Fred face and your romance scam Frank, we have what's known as the pig butchering scams, which are the romance scams that are, I did a presentation recently with, a particular prosecutor, Erin West. Some of you may know her. She talked about a recent case that week that she had been prosecuting for $4.5 million. So someone was, from one of these scam states, defrauded an individual, a vulnerable individual, for $4.5 million. It's just shocking. Even more shocking, and Frank, this was one case that we talked about, was these IT workers that they were sending their wages to buy weapons in North Korea. And can you talk a little bit about that? I think the FBI even got involved with that.
Yeah, about a week ago, FBI alerted Americans that there's a major campaign for North Korean IT workers who are working remotely, applying for jobs for US companies. They're using Americans' Wi-Fi's to make it appear that they're dialing in from homes here in America to work for US companies. And there's thousands and thousands of them. And what they're doing is getting the wages, sending them back to North Korea for use in the ballistic missile program. So the money that US companies are giving to these workers are going back for ballistic missiles that can be used against the US. This is what we're dealing with fraud. These are all synthetic identities, by the way. The FBI says if you're a large company, you might have some of these workers working for you. And that's what we're up against. So that was that particularly concerning. What we're dealing with, really bad people.
We are. And speaking of bad people, there was a definite scary link in Baltimore between murder and COVID fraud. So 60% of the homicides in Baltimore, Maryland, were had a link to the person being a perpetrator of PPP fraud. If you think about it, that's the gangs, and they're fighting over probably the proceeds of that fraud. But that's scary to think about, that the fact that we're really looking at mafia style theft, but turning into a very dangerous environment. I know that as a practitioner, I watched as many fake accounts were joining the platform, and behind those were actual gang members. That we actually had a Slack, and that Slack, it was meant to escalate to threats to the call center, threats to the CEO, threats to myself, head of fraud, and those threats were real. Those threats were quite concerning. So as we see fraud, before that we would see the actual fraud event, now we're starting to see the link between crime, felonies, and fraud, and actual physical harm. So it's again, a new age of fraud.
Yeah, I think every dollar of fraud that gets through is being channeled back. A lot of it is being channeled back to weapons, ballistic missiles. This money that we're trying to stop as fraud fighters and crime fighters, we have to know that every dollar that we're able to stop is a dollar we're stopping from somebody buying a gun that's used in a murder, or maybe going back to a ballistic missile program. It's just important, the work that we're doing right now. It's never been more important. So I agree, Marianne. I don't know if we want to go to the next evolving threats, because I think this is pretty enlightening. Let's talk a little bit, Marianne, about some of the more sinister threat vectors, and maybe I'll kick it off if we can go to the next slide. The deep synthetics. So we all know what synthetic identity is, right? It's always been very digital only. It's using fake information to basically create new identities. Synthetic identity has been around actually for almost 100 years. It started when the Social Security Administration launched the Social Security numbers here in the US way back in 1930. So it's been almost 100 years that there's been some level of synthetics happening. But we're going to see a new emerging type of synthetic identity. I like to call it deep synthetics, because it's going to go beyond the digital to an actual physical embodiment of those synthetics. You saw that talking photo that I did. Well, we're going to see avatars. So we're going to see deep synthetic avatars where you can actually have not only a digital representation of yourself, but an avatar and real documentation. So you appear to be fully human, but you're nothing more than a deep synthetic identity. To me, that's an emerging threat. And we're not talking about this 5-10 years down the line. We're talking about this in the next 6 to 12 months, something that you're going to see right away. And Marianne, zombie accounts, why don't you talk about your experience with this, because this is happening right now.
Yeah, zombie accounts this is something I'm pretty passionate about. But when we talk about accounts, we can call them zombie accounts, we can call them fake accounts, but we've seen reports of Cash App having 40% fake accounts. We've seen PayPal make announcements that they had to close down 4.5 fake accounts. I've seen some marketplace data where Mickey Mouse is a common user on the platform. So we're looking at these accounts, but these are accounts that are opened up with identity theft. You and all of our identities are sitting on this call today. they're used with synthetics, they're opened up, and those accounts are very valuable, and they commit all of the things that we've been talking about today. They commit these crimes, they commit, the money's funneled towards human trafficking, it's funneled towards drug trade, it's funneled towards gang activity, it's funneled towards weapons. So we think, if we don't, I call it what goes wrong when you don't get identity right. It's more than just proceeds of crime and money. It really ties into some things that are, damaging to society as a whole. So zombie accounts are something that, if we look at, what's some, good advice that, like, what do we want to do to have an impact on reducing the amount of zombie accounts on any portfolio is really, really important.
Yeah, I think, Mary, and I had heard statistics to put this kind of in perspective for, if you're in the e-commerce area, right? I've heard statistics that upwards of 60%, sometimes more, of accounts on e-commerce platforms could be zombie, could be fake accounts, right? Some level of synthetic identity. This is not a bank problem anymore. This is an e-commerce. This is a payments problem. This is expanded across the ecosystem. If somebody's creating a synthetic bank account, you have to know that they're using that synthetic credit card account to make charges, to make payments that are hitting your platforms. So this is an ecosystem that's creating. So I think these zombie accounts, you can't stress it enough that we have to solve this problem.
Right. So this is the next one. It's tech breaks tech, and Frank, this is one I really love. We've worked really hard to put good identity processes in place, good authentication processes in place, good fraud prevention and detection processes in place. But you and I just talked today about some emerging tech that's coming out. We're going to start to see tech breaking tech. We're going to start to see authentication methods fail or to be challenged. We're going to start to see identity processes fail or be challenged, which that's already happening with KYC today. We're going to start to see models break in fraud because of the fact that we've got these new emerging threats. So, I look for, machine versus machine, tech versus tech. We're definitely going to see those challenges in the next 6. It's happening right now, so we'll start to see more of it. That's
a long-term problem, Marianne. I totally agree.
Yeah.
The shapeshifters. We learned about this from Carice Hendricks. Carice Hendricks, and again, is a good friend of ours, very prominent in the e-commerce space. Last year, Thanksgiving Day, e-commerce merchants discovered a new type of fraudster that they're calling the shapeshifters. And what it involved, the shapeshifters were doing multi-pronged attacks. They were hitting fraud technology. So they would go out and do DDoS attacks against the fraud technology that was supposed to be used to validate e-commerce transactions. Think about these like identity type of solutions you may use before you send merchandise out. So they were doing DDoS attacks to take those offline so they could get their orders through. They were changing information on applications instantly and communicating with each other on Telegram and WhatsApp. And these are shapeshifters. Basically, they're using anything at their disposal, coordinating second by second and hitting e-commerce merchants in a way that e-commerce merchants had never seen in history. Now we're about 3 weeks away from Black Friday, right? Thanksgiving, the day after Thanksgiving, when everybody shops again. Will this happen again? Quite possibly. A lot of people are on alert for it, but the shapeshifters is something that is absolutely terrifying, that they can have this kind of access to technology and to each other to be able to, with a single attack, kind of bring down a merchant and cause millions of dollars in damage. Let's go to the next piece, because we want to leave you off. Marianne, I want to ask this. Are we ready for this new world where we've got more sinister bad guys, evolving technology and emerging threats? I mean, what do you think?
Well, I think about everyone on this call today, and I'm thinking we're here for a reason. This e-commerce day is amazing. We're collaborating, we're talking. I think our community is ready. I think we're ready to go. But do I think that the business, the CEOs are ready to support the fraud teams? I think not. I think we have a job in front of us. to make sure that we get the support that we need for investment to make sure that we can react to the evolving threats. And I think that's a good segue into the next slide, that we can actually start to talk about, what do we do as practitioners? Let's not be quiet. It's I can tell you over my career, and probably this has happened with Frank too, they would say, oh, you fraud people, you always say the sky is falling. Well, you know what? The sky is falling, because I've seen banks have to turn off their account opening processes. We see banks now or other companies having to disclose fake accounts, and then it affects their stock prices. The sky is falling. We're starting to see banks that have check fraud that have to announce to the public domain and to the investors that, oh, by the way, our revenue is going to be quite affected this month. So early in my career, we talk about standing on the table, and Frank and I always laugh about this story, but this is a true story. We were looking at a fraud system. This was an up and coming state-of-the-art fraud system, and there was a group of us in a meeting, and someone said, well, if you really kind of, it was a dare, if you really think we need this, Marianne, why don't you just stand on the table? Well, I did. I got up on the table, I stood on the table, and it was a dare, but I really said, we need this solution. This is important. This is important for the future of our business. And what I want to just do is challenge everyone on this call. If you don't want to stand up on a table physically like I did, actually stand up on the table. Don't be quiet, at least from a metaphor standpoint. Make sure that your voice is heard. Make sure you have a voice around that table. Sharing, like we're doing today, consortiums, roundtables, webinars. Make sure that we're educating each other. There's not a day go by that Frank and I don't say, oh, look at this or look at that. We're constantly talking about the new and evolving threats, but also the new evolving solutions to stop them. Educate each other. We have some really great, about fraud. We got Carice's Fraudology podcast. There's so many. The fraud community is coming around in a much more professional and educating in a very interesting way. And I really like the fact that we can all educate each other. And lastly, I would be amiss if I didn't mention the Noble. Frank and I are both on the board of the Noble, and the Noble is really focused on really stopping human crime. Those are the things that affect our society. Human trafficking, child exploitation. And we're really working with businesses, we're working with banks, we're working with law enforcement, we're working with the communities, we're working with this industry to really get the word out that we can make an impact. Frank, any last things that you'd like to share too?
Yeah, I just like the title of the slide, Being Quiet is Not a Strategy. As a consultant, and you know this just as much, Marianne, but I just have found that the overwhelming majority of customers of banks, finance companies, lenders, e-commerce merchants I've worked with have been really reticent to share their experience with others because they think I'm going to be embarrassed if I got hit by a fraud attack. Or in some cases, there's a misguided strategy like we shouldn't share publicly what's happening because the fraudsters will hear it and then they'll change what they're doing. And that's absolutely the wrong way to think. Go to Telegram, look up the 100,000 fraud channels with millions of people, millions of fraudsters communicating in real time with each other. And then look at the industry, and we don't do that enough. We're not doing what the fraudsters are doing to communicate, to share, to get ahead of this. And we will lose if we are quiet. So we have to do a strategy to educate each other, to use our skills, to make sure that our managers, our executives know that investing in fraud tech is important. In people, it's important. Let us participate in industry groups and share what's happening because we only get stronger together. And I guess that would be Marianne and my recommendation to all of you. I know you're fraud fighters, you do tremendous work, but this is the things that from our years of experience that we think are really important.
You are outstanding. Absolutely outstanding. When we kicked this day off hours ago, one of the things that I wrote in the opening monologue was, why did we do this? And one of the line items was because we want you to know that you're not a cost center, that you should not be the first team impacted by layoffs. Your sentiments ring true across everybody in the trust and safety arena, risk, fraud, compliance, all of it. There is a question in the chat box. We are at time, but what I will do is I'll grab it. I will circle back with you awesome humans, and then we'll get it out to the audience so we can touch on it. But thank you so much for what you work on, what you do, your passion in the space. We
Absolutely.
can't do it without champions like you. So
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting us to this awesome event. We just loved it. We love you guys, and we really appreciate the opportunity.
outstanding. That means the world to us. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Everybody jump to the next session. Take care, guys. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.